The throne room was silent, save for the steady dripping of rain against the stained glass. "It's already done, Luna," David said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the crown resting on the velvet cushion before him. Luna stared at the man she had loved since they were children running through the Silverwood. He looked the same. Broad shoulders, dark hair swept back, eyes the color of a winter storm. But the man she knew was gone. "You traded us," she whispered, the truth tasting like ash. "For the Northern Territories, for the allegiance of the Blackwood Pack." David finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I secured our future, our survival." "No," Luna said, turning away as the first tear fell. "You secured your crown and lost everything else." The scent of pine and ozone hung heavy in the air, a precursor to the approaching storm. Luna stood on the balcony of the Alpha's estate, her hands gripping the cold stone balustrade. Below, the pack gathered, a sea of restless energy. They were waiting for David, their newly ascended Alpha King. They were waiting for him to announce his Luna. For 3 years, since David's father had fallen in the border skirmishes, Luna had stood by David's side. She had managed the pack's internal affairs, brokered peace with the minor covens to the east, and healed the wounded when the skirmishes flared up again. She was the steady heart to his fierce ambition. Everyone assumed the announcement was a formality. A soft knock drew her attention. Alara, her closest friend and the pack's lead tracker, slipped into the room. Alara's usually bright face was drawn, her eyes avoiding Luna's. "He's ready," Alara said, her voice tight. "He's calling for you." Luna frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost, El. What's wrong?" Alara hesitated, twisting a silver ring on her finger, a nervous habit. "Just the storm, I suppose. The energy's wild tonight." It was a weak lie, but Luna didn't press. She smoothed the skirt of her deep green dress, a color David had once said reminded him of the heart of their forest, and stepped past Alara. The journey to the Grand Hall felt longer than usual. The torches lining the stone corridors flickered unevenly. When she entered the hall, the low murmur of the pack ceased. Hundreds of eyes turned to her, a mixture of respect and, oddly, anticipation. David stood at the raised dais at the far end of the hall. He wore the ceremonial black tunic, the silver wolf crest gleaming over his heart. Beside him stood the elders, their faces impassive. Luna approached, her chin high. She expected David to step forward, to take her hand. Instead, he remained still. My people," David's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. "We stand on the precipice of a new era. For too long, the Silverwood Pack has been vulnerable. We have bled defending our borders. We have starved during the long winters." Luna stopped at the base of the dais. This was not the speech they had discussed. They had planned to speak of unity, of healing, to secure our future. David continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, intentionally avoiding Luna. "We must forge new alliances, strong alliances." A low murmur rippled through the pack. The doors at the back of the hall groaned open. The wind howled, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something harsh and metallic. A procession entered. They wore colors of charcoal and crimson. At their head walked a woman of striking, sharp beauty. Her dark hair was braided tight against her scalp, and her eyes were a piercing, unnatural yellow. Luna felt the blood drain from her face. She recognized the crest on their cloaks. The Blackwood Pack, their ancient rivals. The pack responsible for the skirmishes that had claimed David's father. David finally looked down at Luna. The winter storm in his eyes was replaced by cold ice. To seal the treaty with the Blackwood Pack and to bring the Northern Territories under our protection," David announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "I take Seraphina of Blackwood as my mate, and your new Luna." The silence in the hall was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on Luna's chest. She couldn't breathe. She stared at David, searching for a sign of coercion, a hint of a spell. But his posture was rigid, his expression resolute. He had chosen this. Seraphina ascended the dais, moving with predatory grace. She took her place beside David, offering Luna a small, triumphant smile. "David," Luna whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. It was too quiet for the pack to hear, but David's slight flinch told her he caught it. "The decision is final," one of the elders intoned, his voice raspy. "The treaty is signed. The bond will be formed tonight at the apex of the storm." Luna didn't hear the rest. The world tilted. She turned on her heel and walked back down the aisle. The pack parted for her, their faces a blur of shock, pity, and a growing sense of unease. She didn't run. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But every step felt like walking on broken glass. The storm broke just as Luna reached the edge of the pack lands. The rain came down in sheets, washing away the scent of pine and replacing it with the raw smell of ozone. She carried a single satchel, packed hastily with essentials. She couldn't stay. To remain would be to accept the humiliation, to watch the man she loved bind himself to another, a woman whose pack had terrorized theirs for generations. It was a betrayal not just of her, but of everything they had fought for. Alara caught up to her at the boundary line, soaked to the bone. "Luna, wait," Alara gasped, grabbing her arm. "You can't just leave. The woods are dangerous, especially tonight. More dangerous than staying." Luna asked bitterly, pulling her arm away. "He sold us out, El. He sold me out." "There has to be a reason," Alara pleaded, rain plastering her hair to her face. "David wouldn't do this without a plan. He's always thinking 5 steps ahead." "Sometimes, a betrayal is just a betrayal," Luna said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "He chose power. I hope it keeps him warm." She stepped across the boundary line. The invisible tether connecting her to the Silverwood pack snapped. The pain was sudden and sharp, a physical blow to her chest. She gasped, stumbling slightly. "Luna!" Alara cried out, but she couldn't cross the line without authorization. "Tell them I died in the storm," Luna said, not looking back. "It will make things easier for his new queen." Luna walked into the dense forest, the darkness swallowing her whole. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get as far away from the Silverwood as possible. The rain masked her scent, a small mercy. For 3 days, she wandered. She avoided the known trails, sticking to the rugged terrain where trackers would struggle to follow. She survived on foraged berries and rainwater, her strength waning with each passing hour. The physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. On the 4th day, the fever set in. She collapsed at the base of a massive oak tree, the rough bark scraping against her cheek. The world spun in dizzying circles. She closed her eyes, welcoming the darkness. When she woke, she was no longer in the forest. She was lying on a soft bed in a small, sparsely furnished room. The smell of herbs and wood smoke filled the air. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows on the stone walls. "You're awake." Luna turned her head. A man sat in a chair near the fire, whittling a piece of wood. He was older, his face lined with weathering and experience. He wore simple, earth-toned clothing, and his eyes were a startling, clear blue. "Where am I?" Luna rasped, her throat dry. Safe, the man replied, standing up and pouring a cup of water from a pitcher. He brought it to her, supporting her head as she drank. I found you near the western ridge. You were half dead. Who are you? My name is Silas, he said, setting the cup down. I am a healer, of sorts. Luna studied him. He didn't smell like a wolf. He smelled of earth, rain, and ancient magic. You're a practitioner. Silas offered a small smile. I prefer observer. You, however, are far from home, little wolf. The mark of the silver wood is faint, but it's there. Luna tensed. Are you going to send me back? I don't involve myself in pack politics, Silas said, returning to his whittling. Besides, a wolf who severs her own bond is running from something worse than a rival pack. Rest. You have a long road ahead. Luna sank back into the pillows. She was safe for now. But the betrayal still burned, a cold fire in her veins. David had chosen his path. Now, she had to forge hers. And she swore, lying in that small cabin, that she would never be weak again. In the Silverwood estate, the air was thick with tension. The wedding ceremony had been a cold, calculated affair. Seraphina stood beside David, radiating a smug satisfaction that set the pack on edge. David sat in his study, staring at the map of the territories spread across his desk. The northern borders were secured. The Blackwood warriors had arrived, their presence a constant, imposing reminder of the new alliance. But the cost was higher than he had anticipated. The pack was restless. Murmurs of dissent echoed in the corridors. Luna had been beloved. Her abrupt departure had left a void that Seraphina showed no interest in filling. A knock sounded, sharp and demanding. Before David could answer, the door swung open. Seraphina strode in, her crimson dress a stark contrast to the dark wood of the study. Your people are difficult, she announced, draping herself over a chair opposite him. They look at me as if I'm a usurper. You are the Luna now, David said, his voice level. They will adapt. They will obey, Seraphina corrected, her yellow eyes flashing. My brother expects results, David. The trade routes need to be finalized by the end of the month. They will be, David assured her, though a knot tightened in his stomach. The trade routes meant giving the Blackwood pack access to the Silverwood's most valuable resources. Seraphina stood up, walking around the desk to stand behind him. She traced a finger along his jawline. You seem distracted, my king. Are you thinking of her? David stiffened. I am thinking of the pack. Good. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. Because she's gone. You made your choice. Don't let sentimentality ruin what we are building. She left the room, the scent of metallic magic lingering behind her. David closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. He had told himself the sacrifice was necessary. The Silverwood was slowly bleeding out from the constant skirmishes. The alliance with Blackwood was the only way to stop the war. He had traded his heart for his people's survival. But the quiet voice in his head, the voice that sounded suspiciously like Luna, whispered, Did you save them? Or did you just hand them over to a different enemy? He pushed the thought away. He had to be strong. He was the Alpha King. Later that night, Alara requested an audience. Speak, David said, not looking up from his paperwork. It's about the northern patrols, Alara began, her tone formal and clipped. The Blackwood wolves are ignoring our protocols. They are hunting in restricted zones. I will speak to Seraphina, David said, rubbing his temples. Alara hesitated. Alpha, there is something else. The pack, they are losing faith. David finally looked at her. They need to understand the necessity of this alliance. They understand that you sold out the woman who held this pack together, Alara said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. And they are wondering what else you are willing to sell. David's eyes darkened. Watch your tone, Alara. I am your lead tracker, she said, holding his gaze. It is my job to warn you of threats. The biggest threat right now isn't the Blackwood pack. It's the resentment festering in your own home. She bowed stiffly and left. David was alone again. He walked to the window, looking out over the dark forest. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still obscured the moon. He had secured the crown, but the throne had never felt so precarious. He had traded Luna for power, and now the true cost of that power was beginning to reveal itself. Months turned into a year. Under Silas's tutelage, Luna transformed. She was no longer the soft, diplomatic Luna of the Silverwood. She learned the old ways, the magic that predated the packs, the magic woven into the earth itself. Silas taught her to harness the ambient energy, to enhance her speed, her strength, and her senses far beyond that of a normal wolf. She learned to fight not just with tooth and claw, but with strategy and silence. You rely too much on brute force, Silas observed one afternoon as they sparred in a clearing behind the cabin. Luna was panting, her muscles burning, while Silas barely looked winded. I am a wolf, Luna retorted, wiping sweat from her brow. Force is our nature. Force without focus is just noise. Silas countered. Your enemies will be stronger. They will be more numerous. You must be smarter. He tossed her a wooden staff. Again, Luna attacked, channeling her anger into her strikes. She thought of David's cold eyes, of Seraphina's triumphant smile. She swung the staff with lethal intent, but Silas deflected every blow with maddening ease. Anger is a tool, Silas said calmly, stepping aside as Luna lunged past him. But if you let it control you, it makes you predictable. He swept her legs out from under her. Luna hit the dirt hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Control the emotion, Silas instructed, looking down at her. Don't let it control you. Luna lay there for a moment, staring at the canopy above. He was right. Her anger was a wild fire, burning indiscriminately. She needed to refine it. She needed to forge it into a weapon. She stood up, dusting herself off. She closed her eyes, visualizing the flames of her resentment. Slowly, deliberately, she began to compress the fire, drawing it tight and hard into the center of her chest until it was a cold, dense star of focus. She opened her eyes. They were clear, devoid of the earlier frantic energy. Again, she said. This time, she didn't rush. She moved with deliberate precision, anticipating Silas's defenses. She used his momentum against him, finding the gaps in his guard. For the first time in months, she landed a solid blow, the end of her staff connecting with his shoulder. Silas stepped back, rubbing the spot with a rare smile. Better. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Silas handed her a small, intricately carved wooden box. What's this? Luna asked. A gift, Silas said. Your training here is complete. You have learned all I can teach you. Luna opened the box. Inside lay a pendant, a jagged piece of obsidian wrapped in silver wire. It is a grounding stone, Silas explained. It will mask your presence from those who seek you using conventional magic, and it will remind you of the focus you found today. Luna slipped the pendant around her neck. The stone felt cool against her skin. Thank you, Silas, for everything. "Where will you go?" he asked. Luna looked into the fire. The image of the Silverwood estate flickered in the flames. She didn't want the crown. She didn't want David. But she couldn't allow Serafina and the Blackwood Pack to destroy her home. "I have to go back," she said softly. "Not to reclaim what I lost, but to protect what remains." She left the next morning before dawn. She was no longer the exiled, heartbroken mate. She was something new. She was a weapon forged in betrayal, honed by isolation, and ready to be unleashed. She was the rogue wolf, returning to the shadows of the Silverwood. The canopy of the Silverwood forest was a dense weave of ancient pine and oak, a roof of green and black that let only the sharpest slivers of moonlight bleed through. For generations, this had been a sanctuary. Now, the very soil felt bruised. Luna moved through the upper branches with a fluid, silent grace that would have been impossible a year ago. The obsidian pendant rested heavy against her collarbone, a constant cooling pressure that absorbed her scent and muffled the ambient hum of her life force. To the heavily armed Blackwood patrols tramping loudly through the underbrush below, she was nothing more than a passing shadow. She stopped on a thick bough overlooking the southern river crossing. The familiar ache of homesickness swelled in her chest, immediately followed by a sharp spike of anger. The crossing, once a bustling hub where Silverwood merchants traded dried meats and woven wool, was now fortified with harsh iron barricades. Banners bearing the crimson and charcoal crest of the Blackwood Pack hung limply in the damp air, a garish stain against the natural greens and browns of the forest. Below, 4 Blackwood enforcers sat around a roaring fire, passing a skin of fermented honey wine. They were large, brutal-looking men, their armor haphazardly strapped over thick leather tunics. "They say the northern passes will be fully clear by next moon," one of them grunted, wiping his mouth with the back of a scarred hand. "Once the ore from these caves starts moving, King David's little pack won't see a single coin of it." Another laughed, a harsh, grating sound. King David. What a joke. The man wears the crown, but Our Lady Serafina holds the leash. These Silverwood mutts are too soft to mine the deep veins properly anyway. We'll have to beat the quotas out of them. Luna's grip on the oak branch tightened until the rough bark bit into her palms. Silas's voice echoed in the back of her mind. Control the emotion. Don't let it control you. She closed her eyes, took a slow, measured breath of the cool night air, and drew the fire of her anger into a tight, dense core. A sudden commotion drew her attention back to the clearing. 2 more Blackwood guards emerged from the tree line, dragging a young boy between them. Luna recognized him instantly. It was Leo, the son of the village baker. He couldn't be more than 14, his face streaked with dirt and terror. "Look what we caught sneaking around the supply carts," the lead guard sneered, tossing Leo roughly onto the dirt near the fire. "Thought you could steal from the Alpha King's stores, little thief?" "It was just flour," Leo stammered, scrambling backward, his eyes wide with panic. "My mother is sick. The rations they give us aren't enough. We're starving." The guard who had been drinking stepped forward, drawing a heavy, iron-tipped riding crop from his belt. "The rations are what Lady Serafina decrees. Thievery is paid for in blood." He raised the crop. Luna didn't think. She acted. She dropped from the branch, 20 feet above, and landed silently in the center of the clearing, directly behind the man with the crop. She moved not with the raw, chaotic speed of a wolf, but with the focused, channeled energy Silas had drilled into her. Before the crop could fall, Luna struck. She drove the heel of her hand into the nerve cluster at the base of the guard's neck. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in a heavy heap of armor and bone. The other 5 guards froze, their wine-addled brains struggling to process the sudden intrusion. Luna didn't give them the chance. She swept her leg out, catching the 2 guards who had brought Leo in, sending them crashing into the barricades. She spun, drawing a short, beautifully balanced wooden staff from her back. It was a dance of brutal efficiency. She didn't use her claws. She didn't want to leave the obvious marks of a rogue wolf. She used momentum, leverage, and precise strikes to pressure points. The 3rd guard lunged with a drawn blade. Luna sidestepped, caught his wrist, twisted it sharply until the blade dropped, and drove the blunt end of her staff into his solar plexus. He fell, gasping for air that wouldn't come. In less than a minute, the clearing was silent again, save for the crackling fire and the heavy breathing of the young boy on the ground. 6 Blackwood enforcers lay unconscious in the dirt. Leo stared at the hooded figure before him, trembling. Luna slowly lowered her hood, letting the firelight catch her face. Leo's breath hitched. "Luna, but they said you perished in the storm. They said you were gone." "A part of me was," Luna said softly, offering her hand to help him up. Her voice was steady, holding a quiet authority that hadn't been there before. "But the forest remembers its own, Leo. Take the flower. Go back to your mother. They'll come looking for whoever did this," the boy whispered, looking at the fallen men. "They'll punish the village. Let them look," Luna replied, stepping back into the edge of the shadows. She reached into her satchel, pulled out a small, crescent-shaped piece of silver, and drove it into the wooden post of the barricade. "Tell no one you saw me. But if anyone asks what happened here, tell them the shadows of Silverwood have teeth." She turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving the boy standing alone in the firelight. The morning dew clung heavily to the ferns as Alara knelt in the dirt of the southern crossing. Her sharp eyes, trained to track the lightest footprint over solid rock, scanned the chaos of the clearing. The Blackwood guards had been found at dawn, bound tightly with their own belts, bruised but alive. The air was thick with the scent of fear and cheap wine. But underneath it all, Alara caught a strange absence. There was no distinct scent of an attacker, no wolf musk, no human sweat. It was as if the wind itself had swept through and beaten 6 heavily armed men into submission. "What do you make of it, Tracker?" Alara stood up slowly, facing the Blackwood lieutenant who had been assigned to oversee the investigation. He was a vain, cruel man who looked entirely out of his depth. "They were taken by surprise," Alara said, her voice deliberately flat. She pointed to the drag marks near the fire. "The attacker was fast, incredibly disciplined. There are no claw marks, no bite wounds. This wasn't a feral rogue." "A human mercenary?" the lieutenant scoffed. "No human could drop 6 of my best men without raising an alarm." Alara's gaze drifted to the wooden post of the barricade. Half hidden in the shadows of the morning light, a small silver crescent was embedded deep in the wood. Her heart executed a painful, violent stutter against her ribs. She recognized that silver. It was a piece of the ceremonial chalice used during Silverwood naming ceremonies. "Perhaps," Alara lied smoothly, shifting her body to block the lieutenant's view of the post. "I will need to track the perimeter. See if they left a trail heading towards the eastern ridges." She spent the next hour walking in the wrong direction, leading the Blackwood patrols on a wild goose chase through thick brambles. Only when she was certain she was unobserved did she double back, slipping past the patrols and heading deep into the oldest part of the forest, the moonlit caves. It was a place the adults of the pack warned children to avoid, a labyrinth of unstable rock and subterranean rivers. Ilara navigated the twisting tunnels by memory alone. She reached the central cavern, a massive hollow illuminated by a single shaft of sunlight piercing through the ceiling. The air here was freezing, smelling of damp stone and ancient moss. "You always were terrible at lying to authority, El." Ilara spun around, her hand dropping to the hunting knife at her thigh. Stepping out from behind a massive stalagmite was a ghost. Luna stood there, dressed in dark, practical leathers, her hair braided tightly against her scalp. She looked leaner, harder, the soft curves of the diplomat, replaced by the sharp lines of a warrior. But her eyes, they were the same deep, empathetic green. Ilara let out a choked sob. The knife clattered to the stone floor as she closed the distance, throwing her arms around Luna. The embrace was fierce, filled with a year of unspilled tears and agonizing guilt. "They said you died." Ilara wept into Luna's shoulder. "David said the bond snapped. We felt it. I thought you were gone. I had to break the tether, El." Luna said gently, returning the embrace tightly. "If I had stayed bound to him, he would have always known where I was. Serafina would have hunted me down to ensure her claim was undisputed. I had to let the Luna of Silverwood die." Ilara pulled back, wiping her eyes furiously. She looked at the woman before her, sensing the sheer, contained power radiating from her. "What happened to you? Where have you been?" "Learning," Luna said simply. "Preparing. But I need to know what is happening here. The patrols, the barricades. It's worse than I imagined." The joy of the reunion faded from Ilara's face, replaced by a weary bitterness. "It's a slow death, Luna. Serafina is draining us dry. The Blackwood Pack treats our territory like a conquered province. They take double the harvest, they monopolize the game trails, and they've forced half our able-bodied wolves into the northern mines to dig iron for her brother's armies." "And David?" Luna asked. The name tasted like old copper on her tongue. Ilara scoffed, a hollow sound. "He sits in the high tower. He signs the edicts she puts in front of him. He tells the council that this is the price of peace, that without the treaty, the Blackwoods would slaughter us all. He's a king in name only. He's paralyzed by his own choices." Luna turned away, walking towards the shaft of sunlight. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a scar that pulled tight, but it no longer consumed her. She saw the situation with a cold, terrifying clarity. David had traded his soul to save the body of the pack, not realizing that without the soul, the body would rot anyway. "We can't fight them in open warfare," Luna said, turning back to Ilara. "David's treaty is bound by ancient pack law. If Silverwood attacks Blackwood, it gives Serafina the legal right to execute the council and take total, unquestioned control. We would be slaughtered legally." "Then what do we do?" Ilara asked, her eyes searching Luna's face for hope. "Just watch our people starve?" "No," Luna said, a dangerous spark igniting in her eyes. "We don't fight them as the Silverwood Pack. We fight them as shadows. We cut their supply lines. We sabotage the mining caravans. We make holding this territory so agonizingly costly for Serafina's brother that he forces her to pull back." Ilara stared at her, the audacity of the plan sinking in. "You're talking about a rebellion. I'm talking about survival," Luna corrected. "I need you to find the ones who are still loyal, the ones who are tired of bowing. But they must remain hidden. For now, the Blackwoods are looking for a ghost. Let's give them one." The Alpha's study, once a place of quiet reflection and strategic planning, felt more like a cage. David stood by the massive arched window, looking out over the sprawling estate. The rain had started again, a cold, relentless drizzle that mirrored the heavy atmosphere suffocating his pack. Behind him, a heavy crystal goblet shattered against the stone hearth. Incompetence! Serafina shrieked, pacing the length of the Persian rug like a caged predator. Her yellow eyes were ablaze with fury, her dark hair slipping loose from its usually immaculate braids. 6 trained enforcers, David. Bested by a shadow, a ghost? This is a mockery. David didn't turn around. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigidly composed. They were drunk on duty, Serafina, and they were harassing a child of my pack. If this ghost hadn't dealt with them, I would have had them flogged myself. Your pack? Serafina stopped, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh. Your pack is nothing but a labor force keeping my brother's borders secure. If you cannot control your territory, my brother will send a legion down here to burn the forest to the ash it deserves to be, and root out these rebels himself. David finally turned. The winter storm in his eyes, dormant for so long, flared with sudden, dangerous violence. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping mere inches from Serafina. He towered over her, his chest rumbling with a low, instinctual growl. "Do not threaten my people in my home, Serafina," David said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "The treaty dictates protection, not subjugation. If your brother marches an army across my borders, I will consider it an act of war, and the treaty will be void. Are you prepared to explain to him why he lost his southern supply lines because his sister couldn't control her temper?" For a moment, genuine shock flashed across Serafina's face. She wasn't used to him pushing back. He had been so pliant, so broken since the bonding ceremony. She recovered quickly, smoothing the front of her crimson gown, but she took a step back. "Find whoever attacked my men," she demanded coldly, her voice lacking its previous volume, "before the end of the week, or I will handle it my way." She turned and swept out of the room, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind her. David let out a long, ragged breath, resting his hands on his desk. His head pounded. Every day was a delicate balancing act on a razor's edge. He hated what he had become, hated the compromises he made daily. But the alternative, total annihilation by the Blackwood armies, was a nightmare he couldn't inflict upon his people. He needed to see the site of the attack himself. An hour later, under the cover of the worsening rain, David rode out to the southern crossing alone. The Blackwood guards stationed there snapped to nervous attention as the Alpha King dismounted. David ignored them, his senses flaring as he stepped into the clearing where the scuffle had taken place. The rain had washed away most of the physical evidence, turning the dirt to mud. He knelt near the ashes of the fire pit. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, filtering through the overwhelming scent of wet earth, iron, and the lingering sourness of the guard's sweat. He was looking for a trace, a scent of a rogue, a mercenary, a rival pack. There was nothing. Just a strange, faint smell of ozone and crushed pine needles. It was too clean. It felt deliberate, like magic had been used to scour the air. David stood up and began to walk the perimeter, his eyes scanning the tree line. If someone attacked from the shadows, they had to have left a physical trace. He walked towards the wooden barricades, tracing the rough logs with his fingertips. He stopped, snagged on a splinter of wood, nearly invisible against the dark bark, was a tiny piece of coarse hemp twine. It wasn't the material that caught his attention, but the way it was tied. It was a complex, interlocking knot, forming a perfect figure eight with a hidden slip loop. David's breath caught in his throat. The world around him seemed to slow down, the sound of the rain fading into a dull roar. It was a hunter's weave. It was incredibly difficult to tie quickly, used primarily for setting silent snares in the deep winter snow. "You're doing it wrong, David," a young, laughing voice echoed in his memory. They were sitting under the weeping willow by the lake, teenagers hiding from their duties. Luna's hands were deftly looping the twine. "You have to tuck the tail under the main line, or the snare slips when the prey pulls. Here, watch my hands." David reached out with a trembling hand and unhooked the twine from the splinter. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Only 2 people in the Silverwood pack knew how to tie this specific knot. The former alpha, who was dead, and Luna's father, who was dead. And Luna's father had only taught it to his daughter. "Luna," David whispered into the rain. She was alive. A tidal wave of conflicting emotions crashed over him. Relief, so profound it made his knees weak, washed away the lingering guilt of her supposed death. She had survived the storm. She was out there. But following the relief came a cold, creeping dread. She wasn't just alive. She was the shadow. She was attacking the Blackwoods. She was systematically dismantling the fragile piece he had sacrificed everything to build. If Serafina found out, she wouldn't just execute her. She would torture her to death in front of the entire pack to make an example of the alpha's former mate. David closed his fist around the piece of twine, hiding the evidence. He looked out into the dark, impenetrable forest. The woman he loved had returned from the dead. But she had not come back for him. She had come back for war. And for the first time since he took the crown, David had absolutely no idea what to do. The weeping willow by the lake stood as a silent sentinel in the dark, its long, trailing branches brushing the surface of the black water. The rain had finally ceased, leaving behind a thick, creeping mist that clung to the roots of the ancient trees. David stood beneath the canopy, the damp chill seeping through his heavy wool cloak. In his hand, he held the coarse hemp twine tied in the hunter's weave. He had left a matching knot on the splintered barricade at the southern crossing, a peace tie, a silent plea for an audience. He had waited here for 3 hours, the cold settling deep into his bones, listening to the nocturnal symphony of the forest. He was beginning to think she wouldn't come. Why should she? Then, the ambient sounds of the woods subtly shifted. The crickets didn't stop chirping, but their rhythm altered. The air grew infinitesimally cooler. "You always were impatient, David." The voice was a ghost, a whisper weaving through the willow branches. David spun around, his heart slamming against his ribs. She stepped out of the mist, materializing as if the shadows themselves had woven her into existence. Luna wore dark leathers, blending seamlessly with the night, the silver wire of an obsidian pendant catching the faint moonlight. She looked fundamentally different. The gentle, diplomatic warmth that had once defined her was gone, replaced by the lethal, composed stillness of a drawn bowstring. "Luna," David breathed, taking a step forward. His voice cracked under the weight of a year's worth of grief and suffocating guilt. He wanted to close the distance, to pull her into his arms and prove to himself that she was real. But her posture stopped him cold. She did not move. She merely watched him, her green eyes unreadable. The peace tie was a gamble. "You risk much coming here alone, Alpha." The formal title felt like a blade slipping between his ribs. "I had to know it was you," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The guards at the crossing, The disrupted supply lines? It's been you. The forest protects its own, Luna replied evenly. Since its king no longer will. David flinched, the words striking true. You don't understand what I faced that night, Luna. You didn't see the casualty reports. Blackwood had 5 times our numbers massed at the northern ridge. If I hadn't agreed to the treaty, if I hadn't taken Serafina, they would have slaughtered the children in their beds. I sacrificed my soul to save their lives. You saved their bodies, David. Luna countered, her tone devoid of anger, which somehow made it worse. It was a cold, clinical assessment. You saved their bodies and traded away their spirits. A pack that lives on its knees is already dead. Look at them. They are starving, terrified, mining iron to forge the very swords that will be used to keep them subjugated. I am trying to buy time, David argued, his composure slipping as desperation bled into his voice. If I can stabilize the trade, I can negotiate better terms. I can ease the quotas. Luna let out a soft, humorless laugh. It sounded like breaking glass. You cannot negotiate with a parasite, David. Serafina will take until there is nothing left. But you don't need to worry about the iron quotas anymore. David frowned, confusion warring with the turmoil in his chest. What do you mean? Did you really think I was just playing at being a nuisance in the woods? Luna took a slow step forward, the mist swirling around her boots. Beating up a few drunken guards is satisfying, but it doesn't win a war. For the past 2 months, Ilara and I haven't just been stopping the iron carts. We've been stealing them. David's blood ran cold. The missing shipments. Serafina said they were delayed by mudslides in the passes. There are no mudslides, Luna said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, calculating light. The iron has been rerouted to the eastern covens, the very covens you ignored when you took the crown. We've been trading Blackwood iron for coven magic and mercenary contracts. By the next full moon, Serafina's brother won't be receiving weapons. He'll be receiving an army at his eastern flank. David stared at the woman before him, utterly stunned. He had spent a year playing a defensive game of politics, trying to minimize damage. Luna had spent a year orchestrating a massive, multi-territory coup right under his nose. If Serafina finds out about this, David began, genuine terror for Luna seizing his throat. She already has. The new voice cut through the mist like a whip crack. David whipped his head around. Stepping out from the shadows of the tree line, flanked by 4 massive, fully shifted Blackwood wolves, was Serafina. Her yellow eyes burned with a manic, murderous fury, her crimson cloak dragging through the wet grass. How touching, Serafina spat, drawing a long, curved silver blade from her belt. The heartbroken king and his little dead whore plotting in the mud. David moved instinctively, stepping in front of Luna, placing himself between her and Serafina's enforcers. Serafina, stand down. This is Silverwood territory. This is my territory. Serafina snarled. I followed you, David. I knew you were too weak to handle the rebellion yourself. I just didn't expect the ghost to be your pathetic ex-mate. She leveled the silver blade at David's chest. Kill her, David. Kill her right now, prove your loyalty to the treaty, and I will let your precious village survive the night. The air grew dead silent. The ultimate choice hung between them, heavy and absolute. David looked at the silver blade, then over his shoulder at Luna. She wasn't hiding behind him. She had drawn her wooden staff, her stance perfect, her face completely fearless. She was ready to die for her freedom. David turned back to Serafina. He reached up, his fingers gripping the heavy silver clasp of his alpha cloak. the cloak that bore both the silverwood and blackwood crests. "You're right," David said softly, the winter storm finally returning to his eyes, dark and violent. "I was weak, but the price of this crown was too high." With a sharp pull, David tore the cloak from his shoulders and let it drop into the mud. "The treaty is void," David roared, his voice echoing across the lake. "Get off my land." Seraphina's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "Tear them to pieces," she shrieked to the 4 massive wolves behind her. The wolves lunged, a terrifying wave of muscle, fur, and bared fangs. David didn't hesitate. He let his wolf push to the surface, his bones cracking and shifting in a rapid, fluid motion. Within seconds, a massive, dark-furred timber wolf stood in his place, a thunderous growl vibrating in his chest. He met the first 2 blackwood wolves head-on, their bodies colliding with a sickening crunch of bone and a flurry of snapping jaws. But Luna did not shift. As the 3rd wolf leapt toward her, its jaws aiming for her throat, Luna dropped to her knees, sliding beneath the beast. She channeled the dense, cold energy Silas had taught her to harness, transferring it into the dense wood of her staff. She drove the blunt end upward, striking the wolf directly in the fragile sternum. The beast yelped, its momentum carrying it over her to crash heavily into the trunk of the willow tree. Seraphina didn't wait for her guards to finish the job. She moved with unnatural, magically enhanced speed, her silver blade slicing through the mist toward Luna's back. Luna spun, bringing her staff up just in time. The silver blade bit deep into the enchanted wood, sending a shower of sparks into the damp air. The impact rattled Luna's teeth, but she didn't yield. She met Seraphina's manic yellow eyes with icy green calm. "You should have stayed dead," Seraphina hissed, leaning her weight into the blade. "You should have stayed out of my forest," Luna replied. Instead of pushing back, Luna abruptly twisted her staff, stepping inside Seraphina's guard. She drove her elbow viciously into Seraphina's nose. Bone crunched. Seraphina stumbled backward with a scream of pain, dropping the silver blade as blood poured down her face. A few yards away, David tossed a limp blackwood wolf into the lake, his muzzle stained with blood. He turned, ready to aid Luna, but stopped. The tree line was no longer empty. Dozens of pairs of glowing eyes pierced the darkness. Alara stepped into the clearing, a heavy crossbow loaded with a silver bolt aimed squarely at Seraphina. Behind her stood the Silverwood pack. They hadn't shifted, but they were armed with hunting rifles, pitchforks, and mining picks. They looked battered and exhausted, but for the first time in a year, their eyes held no fear. They had heard their alphas roar. They had felt the treaty break. Seraphina, clutching her bleeding face, looked around at the encircling crowd. Her remaining 2 wolves, sensing the shift in power, backed away, whining low in their throats. She was utterly outmatched. "This is treason," Seraphina spat, though her voice trembled. "My brother will burn this forest to the bedrock. He will slaughter every last one of you." David shifted back to his human form, ignoring his torn clothing and the blood on his chest. He walked toward Seraphina, his presence commanding and absolute. He was no longer a politician making concessions. He was the alpha of the Silverwood. "Let him try," David said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Tell your brother that his iron belongs to the Eastern Covens now. Tell him the Silverwood is closed. If a single Blackwood wolf crosses our border, their head will be sent back to him on a spike. Now run." Seraphina looked at David, then at Luna, a venomous promise in her eyes. Without another word, she turned and fled into the darkness, her surviving wolves scrambling after her. The silence that followed was profound. broken only by the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. The pack slowly lowered their weapons. Alara walked forward, her eyes locked on Luna, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. David turned to face Luna. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a stark, emotional exhaustion. He looked at the woman who had saved his pack, the woman he had broken to save his crown. "Luna," David said softly, stepping toward her. He reached out, a tentative gesture. "You came back." Luna looked at his outstretched hand, but she didn't take it. She lowered her staff, her breathing steady. "I came back for my home, David," she said, her voice gentle but impossibly firm. "I came back to free my people. The treaty is gone," David pleaded, his eyes searching hers for the warmth that used to be there. "I was wrong. The price I paid, the price I made you pay, it was beyond imagination. But we can fix this. You can take your place by my side, as my Luna." Luna offered a sad, fleeting smile. "The girl who wanted to be your Luna died in the storm, David. You made a choice to be a king, and you had to learn the hard way that a king without his pack's spirit is just a warden." David's hand fell to his side, the finality of her words settling over him like a shroud. "So, what are we?" "We are a pack at war," Luna said, turning to face the gathered crowd, who looked at her with awe and reverence. "You will handle the politics. You will fortify the borders and prepare the defenses. I will lead the Eastern Coalition. We will fight together, as equals." She looked back at him, the green of her eyes reflecting the first faint light of dawn breaking over the lake. "But the bond is broken, David, and some things, once shattered, cannot be put back together." David watched her walk toward Alara, the pack parting to let her through, their heads bowing in deep, unprompted respect. He had his crown. He had his pack. But as he stood alone by the edge of the dark water, the Alpha King finally understood the true cost of his power. He had saved his world, but he would spend the rest of his life living in it without her. The tragic tale of David and Luna proves that while power and survival may demand terrible sacrifices, the cost to the human heart is often the heaviest burden to bear. David secured his kingdom but lost his soulmate, while Luna forged herself into a weapon of freedom, proving that true leadership comes from the spirit, not a treaty. The echoes of their broken bond will resonate through the Silverwood long after the impending war is fought. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal, magic, and relentless emotional tension, please leave a like. Share this story with fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and subscribe to follow our upcoming cinematic tales. What do you think? Did David make the right choice in the end? Let us know in the comments.